What's up, everyone? My name is Joe Laloon, and welcome to the Three-Phase Podcast. Today, I'm talking with Anastasia Berezowsky about emotional reps, nervous system capacity, and what real mental conditioning actually looks like in everyday life, especially if you're someone who performs at a high level but still feels the weight of stress. In this episode, you'll walk away understanding how to build mental and emotional capacity the same way you build strength, through reps, exposure, and structure. This one's powerful, especially when Annie said this.
Supporting your system, you want to make sure that you know when to step in or step out of that.
And I can't wait for you to hear the story about overcoming performance anxiety towards the end of the conversation. All right, let's dive into the episode.
The Three-Phase Podcast is starting now.
Okay, we train our bodies with reps, structure, and progressive stress. But when it comes to the mind and nervous system, we expect calm, clarity, and emotional control to show up when life gets hard. Today's conversation is about why that doesn't work and what actually does. My guest today is Anastasia Berezowsky, founder of Birch Wellness. Annie and I worked together in Toronto, and we trained a lot together. So we've both lived the overlap between physical training, nervous system stress, and real life pressure. Annie's work focuses on mental and emotional conditioning, distress tolerance, building nervous system capacity so people don't just feel better, but function better under stress. This episode is about training the mind like a muscle, not through hacks or mindset slogans, but through capacity, reps, and real-world exposure. Annie, welcome to the Three-Phase Podcast.
Thank you for having me, Joe. Very exciting.
So when you hear the phrase training the mind like a muscle, what does that mean to you in practical, real-world terms?
Yeah, I think this is a really great opening question because when I think of training the mind like a muscle, it's not about like positive thinking or motivation. It's all about capacity, like what you were mentioning, and we'll touch on that a little bit more later. But just like how physical training muscle adapts to load and stress, the nervous system and our mental capacity adapts to experience. And so training the mind basically means repeatedly meeting that discomfort without escaping, without finding ways to go around it, shortcuts. It's meeting it fully and then allowing that recovery. Just like how in physical training we would, feel the muscle burn or you feel sore the next day, we have to do the same thing with our mental health. I'll tell you a little bit about my background and why this is such a big passion of mine now, because my education is in kinesiology and psychology. And I am lucky in that I have always known I've wanted to help people and their health. But that avenue has changed over the years. So yes, I worked in the physical side of things in the fitness industry. And I loved it. I actually kind of went into it accidentally. I was a referral of one of my friends who was working for Good Life Fitness at the time. And at the time there was the referral bonus. And so I was his referral bonus in working with Good Life. And I had such an amazing experience in being able to help so many people with their physical health. But once 2020 hit, I think the fitness industry really changed, and where people were coming in pre 2020, it was all about being stronger, losing weight, more energy, and then post 2020, it was all about capacity. It was all about feeling better. It was all about more of a mental fitness side of things, and I felt like this was something that was really important for my team to learn about. And so that's why I pursued my master's in psychotherapy, to build those skills and tools, because now people are shifting away from just the physical performance side, and they're recognizing that there's a gap in how they're feeling and what they're doing. And so in real life, what that really means, what this mental capacity really means, is being present. It's making sure that you're there 100% during a hard conversation, noticing any urges of wanting to shut down or avoid, or running thoughts going through your head, and not really fixing it immediately, but just staying present with that discomfort, just the same as you would be present with that burn once you're in that final leg of the race, or you're trying to push for those final reps in your workout.
Yeah, that's great. I think too, like, because most people have a good understanding of what the gym space is like, what it feels like to do a lot of these things physically. Maybe a good parallel, like a era parallel to this is, in the 70s, it was this bodybuilding method of like just go till you break it, no pain, no gain.
Yeah.
And then as we went through, the 90s, some more intelligent training came in where there was a bit more, methodical and how you approach a workout in a week, and then how you do that over a year. And then sort of into the 2000s, the science of training started to leak into that, and people really became thoughtful about how to actually build programming and exposures and stimulus. And now it's probably gone a little too far, and now we have these arguments with science-based training versus non-science-based training. Guys who just get after it. But the parallel is kind of the same in the mental world, where no pain, no gain is like the total opposite of being mindful and thoughtful about how you're feeling as you're going through stuff. It's just you got to do it, and it's probably not really been till in the last 20 years when people have started to think about like, and I think about it more in like an athlete's term, where you like someone like Simone Biles, who she stepped away from the sport to deal with a mental health thing. Like that definitely did not happen 20 years ago, and was more just like a pull up your bootstraps and get going kind of thing. So it's kind of just a cool, like they're probably off each other by a quarter of a century, but the training progression and the mental progression, now we are getting to a point where the world is waking up to better balance as maybe a
Yeah.
good starting point, at least.
Yeah, and I think also, it's moving with intention.
Mm,
I think when I hear no pain, no gain, it's like very autopilot, and it's
mhm,
it's an external rule. And it is interesting how mental health has become a bigger space where it's more accessible to people. And
mhm,
it's there's a debate as to, okay, is it because stigma is going down, or is it because these tools are now becoming more readily available to people, that they're realizing, okay, there is a gap
mhm.
with how they're feeling and what they're doing, and trying to figure it out as they go.
Do you think 2020 was like a big flip of a switch where people had so much time with themselves that they were kind of like, I should deal with that. Like it's now it's
Yeah.
present because there's no distractions.
Yeah, I think that's has a huge component to it. I think, you know, the sense of social isolation does create a lot of reflection. I'll tell you like a little metaphor that I like to share with clients, and it's that when you see somebody underneath a lamppost and they're looking for their keys, and you go up
Mm,
to them and you ask, "Oh, what where did you last see your keys?" And they go, "Oh, across the street in the parking lot." And you go, "Well, the obvious question is, why aren't you looking in the parking lot?" And they go, "Well, because the light is better here." The whole metaphor behind that is that it's easy to look at things when they're right in your face, but
mm,
it's harder to look into like the darker parts of ourselves and our characters. And I
mhm.
think 2020 was a time where we saw a lot of darkness as a society, a lot of fear. And so when you experience that as a collective, there's definitely going to be inward um, you're going to look inwards and see, okay, well, how am I feeling with all of this?
Yeah, and it's kind of seems like it has been the first step to a bit more of a large scale enlightenment.
Mm-hmm.
What do most people misunderstand about mental strength?
Mm. I think like mental strength isn't about thinking harder.
Mm,
It's more so about being present under that load,
hmm,
right? I think a lot of the times we want to push through and we want to go through experience like and discomforting experiences quickly,
hmm,
but quite often that's how you can widen your window of capacity, right? There's a theory called window of tolerance. I don't love the word tolerance because it implies that there's almost like a submissiveness to it. But if you increase the capacity, then what you are able to do is empower yourself to develop insights,
hmm.
right? And to look at yourself in a safe and non-judgmental way.
Yeah, I like it. I mean, just to make a sport or training analogy, just to
Yeah.
kind of keep the thread going. You think about when someone is squatting as an example, and when it's new and you haven't really had the opportunity to sit with the intention of it. And when you're training someone new going through something like that, they tend to rush something that is heavier, or they just sort of maximize their effort without improving their intention or focus. And as you
Mhm.
get more exposure to, let's say, a weight, just as a comparable, that you start to learn how to maintain focus and maintain intention. And it's not just about effort; it's about technique and
Yes.
getting the thing to move better because you've become more used to it.
Yes, absolutely. And when I hear getting better at the technique, what really comes to mind to me is like mastering the basics,
Mm,
right? Is having a strong foundation. And I think so many people have not learned the foundations of mental health. And now we see, just like in the fitness industry, where there's like these fitness influencers and you're doing all these crazy things and it looks new and exciting. The
hmm.
same exact trends happen in the mental health world.
Yeah.
And what I notice is that the mental health industry is kind of created, like it parallels the fitness industry.
Hmm.
And there's so many providers, just like there's so many coaches and so many personal trainers.
Yeah.
And each personal trainer has like a niche and a background, and it's so difficult to narrow down like what is a good, experience versus a not so great experience. And
Hmm.
it just comes down to like putting in your reps, to mastering the basics and mastering the technique, and that will create a strong foundation for all the increasing your capacity for later
Yeah. Yeah.
things.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And I think it's probably the exact same problem. I call it a problem where um, eyes on does not equal quality of practice. It's
Yeah.
the same thing with fitness too. Just because somebody has a million followers does not mean that they are exceptional at coaching. So that's
Hmm.
definitely a challenge as a user,
Yeah.
or a potential client who's like looking for someone, is how do you narrow it down to find the right fit?
Yeah. Yeah.
Where do you see people confusing regulation with resilience?
Mm, that's a good question. I think when I hear the word resilience, you think of like mental toughness,
Hmm.
right? And resiliency has this implication that you have to stick through it. That we did just speak about sitting in the discomfort, but I've also observed clients who stay in situations, whether it's professional or personal, to stick it out
Hmm.
without standing up. And I think that's really important, and that's the difference between regulation and resilience. Regulation is actually you turn inwards and you respect where you're at, and then communicate that in a way that is respectful, yes, but that you assert your boundaries. I think resiliency is a good quality, but to a point. If we are to ensure that your environment is a supporting your system, you want to make sure that you know when to step in or step out of that.
And it kind of comes down to like thoughtfulness. Like resilience is sort of like, to reference earlier, the like no pain no gain. You just got to stay in it and get through it. Versus regulation is more thoughtful. Like you are thinking about where you are within the spectrum of the position that you're in. I think it's all based in good intention, right? The intention of like being resilient and sticking it out and trying to see things through. But why do good intentions often fail under pressure?
I think, well, just one before I answer that question,
Yeah.
like one thing I just wanted to touch on with the resiliency versus regulation. It's
Sure.
like
Yeah.
just because you can doesn't mean you should,
Nice. Yeah.
right? Like I think, and then if when we go into, sorry, can you repeat your question and then I'll be
Yeah. So the first one was where do people where do you see people confusing regulation and resilience? And then the follow up was why do good intentions often fail under pressure?
Well, I believe everyone who, especially like high achieving professionals and high performing athletes, there's so much discipline and rigidity that comes in order to get to that point, right? But those same rigid habits, those same structures, things like that, that got you to that point can crack under pressure because you now need the flexibility, the cognitive, emotional, and physical flexibility to be able to be dynamic and present in that moment. So I think when it comes to good intentions and like performance, it's needing a new set of tools, yes, but also knowing how to take advantage of the current tools that you have so that you can be adaptable, right? If you know you're, in the, I don't know, if you know a system has helped you, then the probability of going into a different system or tool is hard to do because our bodies, our cognitive abilities always want to map the past because it's the best predictor of future outcome.
Yeah.
But that's not a rule, right?
Yeah, it's like if being a hammer has got you to where you are, you want to continue being a hammer, but the job may require a screwdriver.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Does that come down to like a comfort of practice too? Like you sort of know what works or has worked really well for you, and so it's a discomfort to go and try to be or do something else or use a different tool.
Absolutely. And now we're coming full circle to the first comment or the first topic of conversation, which was being able to meet discomfort and sit with it, right? It doesn't mean fixing or changing. It just means that you're learning a new set of tools.
Yeah. When people understand physical reps pretty intuitively, it's been in our culture now for a long time. Most people go to the gym or have gone to the gym or they have a home gym or something like that. But why is it hard for them to see emotional experiences as reps?
Well, I think like the first thing that comes to mind is that physical reps they're obvious. They're in front of you. You
Mm,
complete them. You have this very clear before after experience versus emotional reps. They're you can't count them. You can't
mm,
It's not the same physical sensations that you get with physical reps. They're invisible and they happen internally, and the only person who can count them is yourself, right? So you have to hold yourself accountable to that experience. And a lot of times too, most people were not taught how to stay with those emotional reps. They were taught maybe through their own self-learning or from their role models or their environment. They were taught to suppress or to avoid or to distract or to perform. And so
mm,
this discomfort now feels like something that needs to be eliminated rather than something that needs to be trained.
mm.
Um, as I was reflecting on this, a stat came up to my mind, which is that there's research that suggests that the initial physiological response to an emotion lasts 90 seconds from trigger to dissipation.
Mm.
And so, if we allow that emotion to run its course without creating stories or having cognitive like thoughts reinforcing it,
Mm.
then basically we can experience an emotional rep within 90 seconds, yet not a lot of people give themselves the space to experience that emotion for 90 seconds.
Mm. Yeah, that's super interesting because I feel like, I mean, you could probably time people, get cut off in traffic, 1,000, two. Okay, they
Mm-hmm.
lost it by that point, or you get in
Yeah.
an argument with your partner, and they trigger you for one reason or other. You could probably, I don't, I'm guessing the average is probably less than 5 seconds before people react to the emotional trigger.
Yeah.
Yeah, 90 seconds in those scenarios definitely would feel like a really long time, and probably would be like an odd thing if you triggered someone, they just waited for 90 seconds. But
Yeah.
the I was thinking about it too, is like, with a gym training, I don't know, your bicep, it's a pretty, like you said, like an obvious rep. You've kind of set it up, what it's going to be. With something like, let's just pick an emotion for the sake of it. It's like with anger, is part of it because, one, it's not recognized in the moment because you are emotional, and maybe two, because it is so variable. Like, the thing that makes you angry is not always the same thing, and so it's not like 20-pound dumbbell bicep curl. It's like the guy cut you off in the car, and it's different every time, and then people's awareness levels maybe just aren't present or high enough to pick up on that trigger being the thing that leads to that emotion.
Yeah, good point. Um, and it's like that's where mindfulness and nervous system regulation go hand in hand. And you're right, like 90 seconds, if you were in conversation with someone and they got upset and all of a sudden went silent for 90 seconds, I go, that's a little strange. But the
Mm-hmm.
reason why I bring it up is because I think there's a time and place for everything. When it comes to
Mm-hmm.
emotional regulation, a lot of people suppress, compartmentalize, and push away. So
Mm-hmm.
it'd be the equivalent of knowing you have to do bicep curls and then refusing to do it because it's hard.
Mm-hmm.
You see it, you're like, okay, there it is. It's in my program. Joe said, okay, bicep curls and
Mm-hmm.
preacher curls, whatever, and I choose not to do it. And then what ends up happening is over time, I end up avoiding that exercise over and over and over again. And then I try and do a pull up.
Mm-hmm.
And then I go, huh, my pull ups aren't actually as strong as I'd like them to be. And what gets sore every time? My freaking biceps.
Mm-hmm.
And so what the the parallel here is that when we avoid acknowledging and having the time to process and sit in that discomfort, let's say it's anger, then what ends up happening is it shows up in other parts of our life.
Right.
And that's where triggers can get very confusing. But what I've observed is that there's a lot of there's patterns. And we just have to get to the root of the pattern from a cognitive standpoint. So what's your understanding of it from an emotional standpoint? Because all emotions have different shades. Just like how you can train your biceps in different ways, emotions have a lot of different varieties to that.
Sure.
And then understanding, how does this emotion make meaning to yourself, how you relate to others, and your overall worldview.
Yeah, and it goes back to the basics, like that you mentioned early on. It's like you got to know the basics to see how it can be applied in all these different scenarios. What actually counts as an emotional rep in day-to-day life? Hey, thanks for listening to the episode. Sorry to interrupt. Just wanted to remind you that you got discounts for Trainerize, BiOptimizers, Whoop, and ATP Labs in the show notes. Okay, back to the episode.
Yeah, I think emotional reps is being present, it's being mindful, and it's setting the intention of sitting into the discomfort. So yes, the 90-second rule is a long time, but if you notice that initial sensation of the emotion coming up for you, just sit in it for 10% longer, just one extra second.
Yeah. Like if your trigger is, if you go off at 2 seconds, try to get it to 5.
Yes. Yeah. And you'll notice that emotional regulation piece, that returning to the baseline, becomes faster and faster the more you practice. So maybe in extreme cases, like when something's very overwhelming, it takes the full 90 seconds.
Right.
But as you get stronger in noticing and recognizing it, then that loop gets closed quicker.
Right. Yeah. It's capacity to deal with.
Yes, that's capacity.
Insert the thing you're trying to deal with. Yeah, that's cool. I mean, this is why we'll touch more on this, I'm sure, but like why coaching is so critical. Take someone who's totally unaware and you start to expose and show them things, and all of a sudden they can start to approach things with better tools and have a better understanding of the things that they are unaware of. Can avoidance look like self-care?
Well, this is a loaded question.
Of course.
Okay? Because I think there's been, avoidance has become romanticized in some ways, in that, I'm going to create boundaries and, choose the people I want to have around me in order to create a sense of self-care.
Yeah.
And I think we come back to intention. It depends on your intention. Because if you're using avoidance consistently, then you're going to be left alone and isolated, thinking, where did everyone go? And so there is a difference between advocacy and avoidance. And advocacy is the action behind your boundary. So a boundary protects something that's important to you. So if I value my time, then I'm going to make sure that the people around me, if there's a miscommunication or wires are crossed, that I let them know, this is something that's important to me in order for us to maintain this, professional relationship or friendship, whatever it is, that these are the things that I would like moving forward. If they disrespect that again, then I can advocate for that and follow up with an action.
Hmm.
And that's where, in order to maintain that boundary, that's where avoidance can come into play. But if you're doing it as your first line of action every single time, then you're not sitting in that discomfort.
Right. You're not creating any kind of stimulus to improve
No.
capacity.
Yeah.
And I think we've seen a lot more of that, in the last, well, I would still say post 2020, but maybe in the last 3 years, kind of nerfing the world that you live in and not having anything sort of challenge you or upset you or question your beliefs or anything. And anything that comes into that circle of safety gets met with reactions, really large, explosive reactions and defense mechanisms. And it's really interesting to witness. And then also those people not witness their own awareness to, how safe they've tried to make their world, like air quotes safe they've tried to make their world, but really what they've done is eliminated tolerance.
Yeah.
And it's like someone who's never run before, or maybe they did run, they stopped running because it made their legs sore, and now if they get exposed to running again, they're done
Yeah.
for.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's such an interesting analogy because it's like a, a lot of people find emotional and cognitive safety in rigid rules, right? And these
Mm-hmm.
are external rules, and they dictate sense of identity, and they dictate how you behave or how you act. And there's good in having that external structure, but to always fall back on it every single time. So like having a rule of like, oh, and I've met clients like this, and I'm sure you have as
Sure.
well. I don't run,
Mm-hmm.
period.
Mm-hmm.
That is it. And it's not due to an injury. It's not due, it's just a choice
Yeah.
because they've had discomfort with it.
Right.
When there's rules like that with no flexibility, and I think cognitive and emotional flexibility is critical to create that capacity, um, then you just limit your experience.
Mm-hmm. And I think, unfortunately, that trickles down so much to like kids' development. And like at our age, we're sort of at the maybe one of the last generations where we didn't get participation trophies
Hmm.
to just show up.
Yeah.
And I've seen like really cool sort of responses and research on how negatively impactful it is to get the blue ribbon or not keep score in a game, or like nerf the world that the kids are growing up in, because they don't ever get exposure to become resilient or to become tough or to become, or have any kind of capacity for discomfort, because they've been just like protected or sort of like the bubble kid for their whole
Yeah.
life. So I mean, it seems obvious, like what is the expectation when that child becomes an adult and they have to deal with a mortgage and get fired from their job and their partner leaves them, and like they're going to have literally zero capacity for any of that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I know that there's a trend right now talking about gentle parenting. I'm not a parent myself, but like I've observed that this is like there's trends even in parenting, and
Yeah,
it's
for sure.
I think it's you want to do what's best for your kids. End of
Hmm.
story, and helping them build that capacity by being present with them.
Yeah. Yeah, but just having like no exposures doesn't seem like the
No,
positive thing to do.
no.
How does overcomfort affect long-term capacity? Like, I mean, that's what we're talking about, but how do you think it in the long term it gets impacted?
I think it limits your experience. Like, if you are not challenging yourself, then you will only come out with a certain set of schemas of how you think about yourself and others, and and the world and how it operates. And that's also where rigid rules can come into play, because you expect things to happen a certain way. And if you haven't had a diverse set of experiences, then it can be quite a shock to the system.
Right.
And those experiences are harder to learn as you age.
Yeah, I think we see that a lot, in the news and on social media more regularly now, where it's almost like met with pure confusion. Like, how could you act that way, or how could you question that thing? It's like you can see it on their face, where it's like pure confusion. They have no idea how you would rationally come to that place or that question or whatever it is. It's pretty, it's very interesting to see, but it seems very childish, right? It seems like how a toddler would react to you saying like, no, you can't watch any more TV.
Yeah.
They're like,
Yeah.
how? Why?
Yeah.
What's the rational thought and why I can't watch TV anymore?
Yeah, it really impacts the relational piece. And like what I'm hearing there is some, like, the notion of empathy can be lost on people because they're only thinking about their own experiences, versus when you are challenged, self-awareness is built on empathy, and it's being able to look at yourself from an outside perspective. And if you don't experience challenges, then at what point are you become like you have no opportunity to be self-aware?
And to make like a sport analogy to that is, you played a ton of sports. I played a ton of sports. Like, imagine if you just like won every time. Do you think you would challenge yourself to like be in the backyard, putting the ball on the net, or like going for that late night run, or, trying to get in more reps? If you just like are always winning, you're never going to have the self-awareness to be like, man, maybe I should try harder or like practice more in order to get better and improve myself so that I can actually compete and improve and move ahead in life. If there's no bar to reach, you won't reach for it.
Yeah, yeah. I also think too, like, a big part of it is that quite often, even when faced with challenges, we're only able to move through the challenges with the tools and coping mechanisms that we have learned and have been given to as children. Quite often, those same tools and coping mechanisms become our problems later in life.
Sure. Yeah.
And so it's that, like, again, that rigidity, that lack of adaptability, that then, those avoidance patterns helped at the time. But now, fast forward 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years later, those same tools are not applicable yet. The body experiences the challenge the exact same way. So it's really interesting. We talk about in our sessions, we talk a lot about implicit versus explicit memory. Explicit being how we envision it. Maybe it's, some people are visual people, so they'll have like a movie going on in their mind. Others will have more of a script going on in their mind. But when it comes to implicit memory, it's how it's felt. And what's really interesting about the nervous system and somatic experiencing is that the body doesn't have a timeline. So it doesn't understand that maybe that experience was in the past. It's experiencing it as if it's current.
Interesting.
And so when we think about overcoming those challenges, yes, that tool of avoidance, let's say, helped in the past. It's not helpful now, but the body will always revert back to it because that's the easiest way to overcome those uncomfortable feelings and sensations.
And it did work at one point.
It did work at one point.
The term distress tolerance is a term most people don't hear about outside of like clinical settings. Why is it so foundational?
Yeah, I think distress tolerance is all about, again, sitting in that discomfort, but not getting hijacked by it. So I think what a lot of people experience is that they have a stress response, but they let the stress response dictate their reaction. And this is all about, I'm going to go into the neuroscience side of things. So I'm going to nerd out a little bit.
Go.
But when we experience uncertainty, what ends up happening is cortisol is released, and that's released through a system called the HPA axis. It's our stress response. And cortisol has had a bad rep in a lot of recent years, but it's not always a bad thing, because cortisol will mobilize the body and release energy. And so this will heighten your awareness. This is great in sport. This is great right before you're about to step on stage for that, public speaking seminar. It helps your body get into like the highest gear, but it also makes the brain very reactive, and it makes a certain part of your brain, your amygdala, which is your fear response, hypervigilant, and the frontal part of your brain, the prefrontal cortex, which is the reasonable, rational part of your brain, become less effective at regulating these processes. And so having good distress tolerance is all about being able to shift gears in a car. I learned how to drive standard, so this is like exactly how it feels. It's like, are you running at a high gear all the time? Because if you are, and you're trying to go 100 miles an hour, then you're gonna burn out that engine. It's gonna stall out very quickly, right? Your body needs to be able to shift gears, and so when we think about shifting those gears, a big part of that is your nervous system. And something called the polyvagal theory is a huge, it's a huge part in that. Have you ever heard of the polyvagal theory?
No, that's
Okay.
new.
So, I think what's really big, I'll lead into this with like HRV. HRV is a really big measure that we use in like the fitness industry, and I actually use it with my clients in the mental health sector as well. And HRV is one of the best tools to measure your stress response, and it stands for heart rate variability. And we want high variability. And the reason for more variability is because then it allows the body to be more flexible and adaptable to stress. So when I first heard this, I actually was quite confused because I thought, well, don't we want our heartbeat to be more regular, like more rhythmic? But what is really important is knowing how your heartbeat is linked to your brain, is linked to your lungs, your breath, and the vagus nerve. And so the vagus nerve is really interesting because it's your 10th cranial nerve, and it innervates all the way down towards your lower abdomen, your diaphragm, your lungs, your heart, as well as the top half of your face. And that's really important to know, especially in the mental health sector, because when we have better adaptability, we're more social. And social engagement happens in the top half of your face. So when you look at somebody's eyes, you can engage with them more, as opposed to somebody who has less focus and they're not looking at your eyes, then it's not as socially engaging.
Right.
So because the vagus nerve is connected to all three parts of like your core, when you exhale, it slows down the heart rate. And when you inhale, it quickens it, it speeds it up. And so when your body is able to regulate itself through breath, through mindfulness, meditation, then your heart actually responds better to your environment. to the stressors, because now this link between your breath, your heart, and even your abdomen, those gut feelings you get, it's all interlinked.
Yeah, I always kind of explain HRV, which now the new era of people won't get, but from our age group and older will get it completely. Computers used to have this thing called safe mode, and it was like basically a binary mode for computers when they were overworked, and you'd hear the fans spinning up inside the computer, and it would go into this like black and white mode. You can kind of operate, but not really. And so I kind of compare that to like the low heart rate variability, where it's very binary, it's very predictable, but the function is very low. The other end of that, like when you have a high heart rate variability, is sort of like, in comparison to that computer, is like with a Mac computer. Like it's a lot more playful. It's a lot more variable. You could do a lot more stuff on it, and you can do it more freely.
Yeah.
So for me, those are kind of the contrasts of a really low HRV and a really high HRV. And then, like you said, like the expressiveness, the playfulness, the variability of it is higher, and it's more expressive, and you can feel it when you're higher. You're generally more cognitively aware. You will make better decisions. You'll have better ideas, and so whether that's in sport or it's in office or you're an artist, right? If you have a higher HRV, that's generally beneficial for everyone.
Yeah. And this is like a higher HRV reflects the mind-body connection in a safe and stable way. So when we think of like the sympathetic, the stress response, we think about fight or flight is like the most common way to think about it, and that signals danger. But the same mobilization is also important for sport. And then the next level to that is actually the immobilization. So sometimes, because the vagus nerve innervates the lower abdomen, it's an older circuitry, because the theory is based off of evolutionary perspectives. So it's an older circuitry, it's slower, but it's longer lasting. And so that's why a lot of stress responses come out as like any sort of inflammatory itis, colitis, IBS, that kind of thing, because this lower level circuitry is constantly on all the time. And that creates a freeze or fawn response. So now we've expanded the not safe or the distress tolerance. When it's low, you're going to have fight, flight, fawn, or freeze. But in a safe environment, that fawn and freeze is your rest digest. It's your recharging. It's like your ability to repair, meditation, sleep, all those things that can help refill your cup so that you can increase your capacity.
Yeah, just a bit of a sidebar, especially on the vagus nerve. But there's a few probably other things that align with this too. Is a lot of devices now are coming out that sort of stimulate the vagus nerve. I just would be curious about your opinion on that, if you think that is a positive thing or maybe not a positive thing.
Yeah, so I haven't personally looked into it thoroughly, so I can't speak too much on like the devices themselves, but I do a lot of vagus nerve exercises with my clients. And so, for example, one fun fact that I always bring up is whenever you're anxious, and for some people who spiral into anxiety thoughts, so one thought immediately goes into the next immediately, and it goes straight into catastrophizing or worst case scenario, start humming. Just hum to yourself or singing, yes, because it helps twofold. One, it helps increase vagal tone, which will improve your heart rate, improve and regulate your breathing. But another fun fact to it is that your brain can't hum and sing at the same time as holding a thought. And so it's a great way to break the cycle because that can be very difficult for especially anxious thoughts. Once they start spiraling, it can be very, very difficult to step away from it. And
Hmm.
so just starting to hum or sing can help increase the vagal tone, regulate the system, and just break the cognitive loops.
Hmm. So it's super interesting with that too, because that vagus nerve is so primal to us. Like it's like sort of from our ancient versions of ourselves. People will see this like mostly in movies and shows and stuff like that too. But when there's something really traumatic happens, like a war movie or something like that, the person goes into fetal position, they rock and they moan or they hum, and those are like your three safest
Yeah.
positions and things you can do to regulate your nervous system.
Yes.
Fetal is like your most uteral position that you can be in. That's the first position Rocking stimulates the vagus nerve and
Yeah.
tones down that fight or flight response, the sympathetic nervous system. And then the humming stimulates the vagus nerve and also reestablishes a sort of neutral tone for it.
Yes, rocking's a really interesting one because you know what it reminds me so much of in the fitness industry is PNF. When you
Mm-hmm.
are doing any sort of stretching, you want to go in and out of the stretch, and you also want to put in effort in the
Mm.
opposite direction that you're trying to stretch. And
Yeah.
what that does is it creates a reflex response to then allow for more movement.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a rocking, that kind of motion of rocking, or even like any sort of soothing your chest, things like that. They
Yeah.
all mimic self-soothing behaviors that babies and toddlers receive. And
Mm-hmm.
yet we somehow lose that tool as we get older because I think our system, it's just not really a common place to be practicing it.
Yeah. The other one is like, is it petting? Is that what they call it? Or it's like, self, like you rub your arms or you
Yeah,
rub your legs. I forget what the term is for that, but
yeah. So it's like self-soothing touch, right? And
yeah.
so there's something called a butterfly tap, which is another common one where you put your hand over top of your chest. Hands are overlapped, so your thumbs are one on top of another, and you just gently tap your fingers on either side of your chest, kind of close to where your delt and your chest meet, and that also helps regulate the system. Um, lots of different
Yeah,
techniques.
there's all kinds of stuff. But this is like going back to tools. These are tools that you can use and like is helpful if you know at least a couple of them so that when you recognize, oh my God, I'm getting like really sympathetic to be, nerdy about it. I can
Hmm.
do one of these three things and that's going to help regulate that. And, for a lot of people, I've probably given this tip to 100 people at this point with breathing is if you can just exhale for longer than you inhale, you're going to start to shift from sympathetic to parasympathetic nervous system, and it's the easiest one you can do. It's like the least obvious, like getting on the floor and rocking in a boardroom. It's probably not the move,
Yeah, yeah.
but just having a
Oh,
few of those tools kind of ready at your disposal is huge.
yeah, another like area that's really interesting is like your the feedback that you get from your eyesight. So
Hmm.
we get a lot of bilateral stimulation through endurance athlete. Like when you're doing an endurance sport, let's say running or cycling,
Hmm.
because it's bipedal movement, your body is constantly shifting, but because you have a path moving forward, your eyes are actually tracking side to side in order to ensure that you're maintaining balance and moving
Mm.
forward. That side to side movement in your eyes is actually very soothing on the brain and
Mm.
helps calm the nervous system, which is why so many people turn to endurance sports or endurance activities
Yeah.
for their mental health.
Wow, that's super interesting.
Yeah, it mimics like a hypnotic state,
Hmm. I mean, that
right?
makes sense too, is like why so many people feel, or not so many people, but there's definitely a good group of people who feel very calm and like meditative when running, and they definitely like zone out into things or into less thinking. And I mean, that makes a lot of sense, especially if your stimulus is always so high and you bring in any version that's going to kind of pull you back towards the middle. It would feel like a lot,
Yeah.
like a lot of change. I agree with what we were just talking about, obviously, but I think those like the tech that goes into sort of like hacking these things is not always a good solution because it doesn't allow us to create awareness. Like if I just get nervous and I put this thing around my neck that stimulates my vagus nerve, I have now offloaded the work to a piece of technology when I should be doing the work.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's necessarily like a healthy thing. I think we
That's
need.
it reminds me of like the vibration plates and then
Oh yeah,
expecting that that's going to help you lose weight sure, that can supplement, but don't expect that to completely solve everything.
but it's
You
doing
have to,
1,000 squats in 10 minutes, Annie.
yeah,
Come on,
I
you don't
know,
have one of those.
all of the reps.
But now we're starting to see like again like that parallel timelines. Like we're starting to see the stuff for mental health hacking versus just doing the work and like doing these trendy, like literally like fancy ways to get through to things instead of working on the fundamentals of what is needed to be good at dealing with it the skill that it is. How does it show up in high performance specifically? How does distress tolerance show
Oh,
up in high performance?
okay, yes. So, in high performing, work or athletes, I think there's a huge amount of expectation and a huge amount of reliance on outcome. Once you're already at that point, it's like there's an expectation that the results are going to be there. And so the forgiveness piece and the compassion piece is harder to practice. And so what distress tolerance in that setting may look like is actually like stepping away, gaining perspective, and implementing rest and recharging as a way to build yourself back up, because I think there's less forgiveness and margin of error. So you have to ensure that you're always on all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So distress tolerance is actually going to be the complete opposite. It's going to be okay with doing the things that will help you build a better foundation.
Yeah. Yeah. I think like to kind of create a link to what I'm doing and with like clients that I work with who are in those positions of like, you got to be on all the time. The expectation for performance is like, there's no room for failure basically. And they come to me because at points in their lives, usually when they've spent so much time on their career and none on themselves, and they're maybe getting into a place where there's a little bit more wiggle room, but they sort of take the same approach to their career, or they want to take the same approach that they've taken to their career to their health and fitness, not understanding that coming in at the top level of stimulus is not the right move. For simple analogy, it's like being thrown into the deep end with not knowing how to tread water. And all you're going to do is create a really poor response to that. And what I've been learning a lot in the last couple of years is that by doing a better intake and understanding where people are in their starting point is to, like, some people may not exercise with me at all for the first couple of months because they really need better tools that will regulate their system and bring them into a place where they could actually potentially deal with some kind of stimulus from exercise or something else. But if they're like, to go back to your car analogy, it's like, you got 4,000, 8,000 RPMs in first gear. You don't have the capacity to actually even take the time to push in the clutch to shift the second gear. Like
Yeah.
that's where they are. They can't even let their foot off the gas enough to push in the clutch to get into a new gear. And I feel like I've met a lot of people in that place in the last couple of years, but it seems way more prevalent than we're aware of. And, you know, from you and I working in a commercial gym for a long time, like now I'm sure if we were both sat in the lobby for an hour or two, we'd be like, no exercise, no exercise,
Yeah.
no, you can exercise.
Yeah.
You should come sit down with us and we'll turn the lights off and you can just work on breathing for a while.
Yeah. Yeah. And quite often, that that ability to recognize in yourself to rest and recharge is just not in people's vocabulary. And then once, you know, in the mental health sector, once people experience a crisis, that's when they
Right.
seek help.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And same thing in the fitness industry. It tends to be like a crisis moment, a straw that broke the camel's back that was like, okay, I need to outsource this. I need some help. I need some guidance. And it's unfortunate that that's the way it tends to be because there's so many steps that we can implement ahead of time and being proactive with it that is quite healthy and preventative.
There's a Paul Checkism, but he says if you have enough purpose, you don't need a crisis. Like if you can see a little further ahead to where you know you need to get things back kind of in, I'm going to say control, but then I'm going to ask a question about that to follow up. In control, you know, then you can start making changes without having to hit the sort of rock bottom moment, because you don't really want to end up in that rock bottom position because it's a hard one to come out of.
Yeah.
But I think most times, I mean, for you in the gym space, you do meet a lot of people at rock bottom, and they, you know, it is the crisis moment where they really understand that they need to do something different.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's like, I really like that quote, but it's like, you don't break from stress itself, you break from resisting it.
Yeah. There's something I was going to say something else too, just with the when you're talking about the, I'll think about it. How does control differ from capacity?
I think again we come back to the idea of like control being rigid, right? And capacity being flexible. And when there's rigidity and rules, it creates an external source of safety. But when those external rules or structures shift, then you have no life jacket to hold on to. It's just yourself swimming. But if you don't know how to swim, then that can
Right.
feel like you're drowning.
Drowning.
So capacity is all about learning how to build those skills yourself and learning how to swim rather than relying on external sources to help you get out of the water.
How do people unintentionally shrink their nervous system window?
I think it's less about shrinking the nervous system. I don't think that there's habits that can shrink it, but I think what ends up happening is people become stuck in what's familiar. And familiar breeds like that can feel comfortable. And when we talk about nervous system and nervous system states, we talked about like the fight, flight, freeze, fawn responses. Those states can create a sense of predictability. And we talked about how like the coping mechanisms, the tools that worked in our past quite often become the problem of our present. And so when we are stuck in these states, then we're more likely to complete these habits that will then give us the same information we're used to, and it closes that loop. And when we
Right.
close that loop and create predictability, it lowers cortisol a little bit, but it reduces our ability to be flexible and respond in an intentional way.
Do you think it's maybe even more accurate to say that it, instead of shrinking it, it just causes like a stagnation or less expansion?
Yeah, I think it's stagnation. I
Mm-hmm.
think that's going to be the biggest one. Quite often, what I've seen is that the one thing that people are trying to avoid, they end up manifesting, right? Because those very things that they're trying to do to avoid, let's say, loneliness, for example, they end up creating an environment where they're craving connection with others, but connection with others meant a threat to sense of self. So they're going to defend themselves, they're going to create these feedback loops that they're familiar with, which then ends up manifesting as loneliness because they're
Mm-hmm.
isolated at the end of the day. And they go, well, everybody's a jerk.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. So even though some people think it's like a protective pattern, um, and when you bring it up and you maybe you think, okay, that's a positive thing, right? You might think like, it's familiar, I know what the outcome is going to be, it's going to be a positive outcome. But the exact same thing will happen with negative outcomes. You just keep running into the same negative outcome because it's familiar. Like
Yes.
you're creating something, and probably does have the same impact of like lowering cortisol a little bit, but now you've put yourself back in this basically the same starting point again, like a snake eating its own tail.
Yes, exactly. And, this is like the second half of what therapy does. So the first half is all about uh, recognizing, being mindful, being intentional with your environment triggers, your thoughts. And it's learning how to change how you respond to it so that you can regulate and get into a point of detaching from how you're reacting. Once you get good at that, then we can look at the narrative. Then we can look
Hmm.
at the meaning making. Then we can look at what schemas is this reinforcing that's keeping you within this realm of thinking. And how do we break out from that, right? So for example, like in high in like workplaces, somebody who gets into a fight or flight response very easily might become a manager that is like very high micromanaging because they've
Hmm.
learned that they can't trust their team.
Right.
But what does that lead to? That leads to a team who is dissatisfied with the management, and then it
Hmm.
reinforces this feedback loop. It can be really hasty decisions under pressure,
Or a
right?
stressed manager who's doing all the work that other people could be doing and overloading
Yes,
their work capacity.
yes.
Hmm.
On the other hand, too, if you go into like freeze or fawn, then you have a manager that is just, a
Pushover.
pushover, avoiding conflict, like avoiding
Hmm.
hard conversations. And that's where like innovation, creativity stalls because it's just
Hmm.
kind of very lax and morale of the team suffers from that as well.
Yeah,
Um,
and then no trust in the other opposite direction of
yeah,
workers to management.
yeah, exactly.
Would you consider this being, driven people becoming rigid under pressure? Is that an example of that?
Yes, I think it can be an example of like the fight or flight response, and it's one of those things where the type of person is attracted to the job role because
Right.
of what it entails, the high stress situations, the high risk management, and so forth, because they thrive in those situations because they know what to expect.
Yeah.
And so they have used what has worked for them in the past into their current structure, but it doesn't work all the time.
Yeah. So how much of that rigidity is identity based?
Yes, and that's where schema and like understanding a sense of self is so important.
Mm-hmm.
I work in downtown Toronto in the heart of financial district, and one thing that I've observed and noticed is that Torontonians are very like they're hard workers, but so much of their identity is what they do.
Right.
And so there becomes a crossover between like a company mission statement and their personal values and mission statement. And
Hmm.
a lot of burnout happens because there's a blurred line between what's important to them and what's important to the company.
Right. Could you give me an example of like a company value and then a personal value and how those kind of get intertwined?
Yeah. So a company value can be something along the lines of innovation,
Okay.
right? So they want to be cutting edge. They're right on top of things. And then a personal value can be self-worth dictated by capability
Mm.
or creativity.
Mm.
So that person may be very interested in the company because it's cutting edge, it's new, it's innovative. But to what extent are they willing to work hard, put in the time, put in the energy in order to fulfill the innovative, cutting edge pressures that the company experiences?
Right.
And without understanding what those personal boundaries are, people walk over their own values all the time without even realizing it.
Mm-hmm. And I think there's maybe even more so like negative examples of that, where it's like a company who's willing to be like cutthroat and kind of cut corners to get ahead and, you know, make more profit. And then the employee starts to do some of those same things. Is that maybe another good sort of counter example to that?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So they take on some of the values of the company, and then there'll come a point where they realize that there's a disconnect between the person that they are versus the person they want to be.
Right. Yeah. You kind of become the company.
Yeah, company man.
Right. Can flexibility coexist with high standards?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think uh, flexibility is knowing what your standards are and respecting that. And that to me is the embodiment of high standards because I think we associate too much with like high achieving needs to be work hard, play hard,
Mm-hmm.
but they're not one of the same.
Mm-hmm.
Having high standards is all about knowing what's important to you, setting those boundaries, and then advocating for that. That's someone who has a sense of high standards.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's something you see like very it's very obvious in Toronto, especially where you people are, you know, up and they're hustling to work first thing in the morning and
Mhm.
they go to that, you know, specific gym in the afternoon and they crush it there and they go back to the office and then they're, you know, they get drinks after and then they stay out all night and then they do it all again the next day and it becomes this like that's the rat race that everybody talks about when it comes to these
Yeah.
sort of metropolitan cities where it's everything is go to the limit all the time, and
Mhm.
that really also becomes an identity for what the standard is in order to be successful. And it is, you know, it's definitely a trickle down thing. It's, you know, their predecessors did the same thing, and so that's what they teach them, and then, you know, that's what they become.
Yeah.
But Toronto's such a like an obvious example of that. It doesn't happen as much in, you know, for me moving to Winnipeg, I kind of saw a little bit more of the balance with that, you know, where people went home to their families or they, you know, hung out with their friends who live across town. In Toronto, it's like you hang out with the people that live within 4 blocks of you. You start your day at 6:30 in the morning, you end your day at 12 o'clock at night, and you do it all again then the next day.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah.
What does flexibility look like without becoming passive?
I think flexibility is the recognition and the awareness of where you're at, and then both emotionally, cognitively, and also like your physical health, and then being able to act on it, right? So I think when we hear passive, it sounds very like letting things happen to oneself versus being the agent of change in your life. And I think where a big part of my therapy practice, my philosophy is all about empowering individuals to be their agents of change. And that means, not only providing tools, but also providing a safe, non-judgmental space so that they can experience these same emotions or thoughts and reprocess them so that they can be let go of rather than them take a hold of you.
Yeah, this is now reminding me of what forgot earlier was when it comes to sort of that reset that we were talking about is what it made me think of is that people don't necessarily even know what to do to reset, and you get a lot of that passivity where people just kind of think that resetting is just sitting on the couch for a day and doing nothing at all and just expecting things to come to you and, repair your body and improve your health and whatever. And really there is action that needs to be taken in order to recover. It's not do nothing. It's, in the fitness example, it's like ride a bike, go for a walk, eat your food, stretch, use a foam roller. You have to still take action in order to reset and recover. But same thing with this and with the mental side of things is you're not going to just change because you've been thinking about it. Like there are steps you have to take. There are things you need to work on.
Yeah, it's so the most common example I hear about like passive recovery when it comes to mental health is doom scrolling and binge watching. Very common ways for individuals to just down-regulate after a work day. Even things like using substances is also another example of how people use external tools to help with their internal, like how they're feeling inside. And you need those active recharging activities. And quite often I talk about like a creative recharge, a spiritual recharge, and that doesn't necessarily mean religion specifically. It's like a sense of purpose outside of oneself. Talking about physical recharging, mental recharging can be anything from journaling, like expressing yourself. It can be singing, but it can also mean a like stimulus refresh. I think another part that's really prevalent is that we're constantly bombarded by notifications, by urgent stressors, by, anything from our phones. Like we're attached to our phones all the time, and it's breaking up our days. And we're constantly having this like cortisol spike or dopamine hits of like these news events or social media. And so having just some, even like starting off with 1 minute to 2 minutes of like a sensory reset, no sound, no light, no, like just sitting.
Concussion protocol.
Yes, exactly. And just like really being present in that can be a huge game changer.
Yeah, but I mean, does that fall into like the disassociation category when people are doom scrolling or like flipping on, something that they don't really care about or, I mean, it'd be really interesting to look at the trends of sort of, I mean, I've seen it with, when the iPhone came out in 2007, you all of a sudden see this massive spike in sort of mental health problems or challenges. But even the amount of time people are spending on their phones, like the average person spends 6 hours a day on their phone.
I didn't know that. That's crazy amount.
And how much of that is just disassociation, and how much of it is disassociation because of the inability to regulate.
Yeah. Yeah. That's when you
That's
get into like autopilot mode.
I mean, and we were talking about tech and stuff like that before, but it's also really interesting to see some tech that tries to help move us away from that. It's like the brick, which is this thing that you tap your phone on, and it basically locks you out of all the social media apps on your phone. And most people will put it, on the other side of their condo or whatever, so that when they're working, they don't get distracted by the phone. And the only way to unlock it is you got to walk across the room. But it's like, that is, it's mind boggling. That's what we have to create, or someone needed to create, in order to keep us off of this thing that is just like a dopamine vampire. And, it's just like getting us these little hits to kind of get us through the day, where, something that we probably would have done maybe 40 years ago or 50 years ago is like, how many people are like painting or singing or playing an instrument or walking regularly. I mean, people are definitely working on that more, but it's like people are walking because the phone is telling them how many steps they're getting.
Yeah.
That they're still attached to that thing. They're not doing it for any kind of greater purpose or as a tool that's going to help them regulate. But it's like these trends, and then how much people are trying to work through these things or trying to become more aware of them is like, one and the same. They're attached to each other too.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like the reward now has to be gamified and tokenized in order for it to be fulfilling. And, to a point, I think that's a good start, but I don't think it's enough.
Yeah, and like even super interesting for me, since in September, like I started doing Tai Chi I try to do it every day. And 4 years ago, 4 year ago, Joe would have been like, wow, that's really kind of lame that you're doing that. Like, would have probably judged myself on it.
Yeah.
But it was more just like a surrender to something that's going to not have a specific outcome. Like, I'm almost doing it because it's not gamified. There is no like direct correlation to like improving a weight on the bar or like improving a time on a run. And so I just try to do it daily. And I personally feel like, in that sort of vein of spirituality, that thing has really helped me regulate. And it's like at the end of a day of going through all the stuff that everyone goes through on a daily basis, it's just one of those things that kind of like brings me back to baseline. And I've done that before with, journaling and meditation, but, I'm a mover, like you're a physical mover. So to have some movement tied in with it, I find that really, really helpful. And it's been a big, like, that kind of world of things has been a big opener for me too. And I think it's helped with my coaching too, because then I talk about that with clients and with people and just try to have them, just crack the door, just open the door, let some air from over that side flow in and see what it does for you, and just be open to it. But yeah, it's the lack of tools replaced by technology is also really, really prevalent right now.
Yeah, I love that, Joe. I commend you to when you're starting something new and out of your comfort zone. It's like it can be really there can be a lot of like self-judgment in it. But that's the exact example of stepping into discomfort and actually kind of surrendering to it and being able to see how it plays out without any external expectations.
The first few times that I was like, boy, this is goofy. That's how it feels. But I mean, it's like anything. It's like, if you never sang before and you're like, how do I even get this first note out? This is going to feel weird. Then you start doing it and you practice and you get better at it. And, you get something out of that. And I think that's important for people to explore for new things. I mean, it's something we always, did as kids. It's like you go to art class and you try painting, and you go to music class and you try saxophone. And, when you hit 30, this is always a crazy stat that kind of blows my mind, is if you want to be in the top 1% of humans in something do one jump every day. Because people after 30, like 99% or
Yeah.
some 90% of people will not jump again in their life.
Oh,
And
that's
also another high
crazy.
percentage of after 30 people won't run or sprint again in their life.
Wow.
So, I mean, we're as you go through your timeline, have you ever seen that graph of colors in cars as it goes through
No.
the decades? It's really interesting to see. Like in the beginning, there's a huge variety of colors and all these different in between colors, and over the decades, that variety has gone down, 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 down to now we're at like 30 or 40 different colors. That's all cars in the world are only fit into this number of colors. But we kind of do that with experiences too.
Yes.
Like as
Yeah.
we go through our decades, like obviously the beginning of our life, everything is brand new. You kind of hit like late teens, you've experienced a lot. And after that, your experiences just become smaller and smaller because of comfort and because of not wanting to necessarily like expand into things that you're not sure of what the outcome will be and those different stimuluses. But if you can then start to re-expand those experiences, or coaching in something like mental health practices that are going to actually help you continue to grow and expand and improve your capacity as a person, that's really valuable.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I think it's correlated to like the age of information.
Mm-hmm.
We're exposed to so much information that it feels safer to be draw within the lines and is to
Mm-hmm.
expand and think outside of the box. And
Yeah.
there's a high risk in being different,
Yeah.
right?
Totally.
And taking that risk can be scary.
Totally. So this is a good segue into AI is becoming more visible in mental health spaces. So where do you see it being useful and where are its limits?
Yeah, I think like AI is here. We're already experiencing so much of it. And so I think it's an important topic to talk about because we're just going to see more and more of it. And so
Mm-hmm.
what I find with AI, and I'm going to speak specifically from like a client or patient perspective, um, AI is a large language model. And so what it can do is it can create insight and it can help someone reflect and it can help with some education. It's great with pattern recognition, but it's not great at regulation. And
Hmm.
so what's interesting about it is that because it can be pre-programmed, it can help create a system to remind you of your resources that are available to you, to empower you to break those patterns. So I'll speak of an example. One of my clients brilliantly used AI, and what she did was she had just recently experienced a breakup, and it was very hard for her to move through the discomfort and to heal properly from the relationship without contacting her significant other.
Hmm.
And so what she essentially did was she pre-programmed AI to say, okay, here are all my tools. This is how I'm like in a good state of mind. Here are all my reasons for the breakup. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and so anytime she had this emotional urge to text her ex, she would open up ChatGPT and
Hmm.
say, "This is what I want to say," and ChatGPT would just spit out all of these tools and resources. Hey, have you tried humming? Hey, have you
Hmm.
tried butterfly tapping?
That's
And
cool.
she would have a conversation with it, and eventually it helped her get to a point where she could regulate herself enough to be able to diffuse the emotions and the thought from who she was. I
Right.
think in partnerships too, it can be very difficult because you become one. And so to kind of untangle yourself can be very overwhelming and very difficult. So that's a great way to use AI. Of course, with any benefit, there's always risks, and this is a very interesting topic because healing doesn't happen just intellectually. It's not just information. It's also through felt experience. It's like when you have a physical injury, let's say you sprain your ankle. It's like you can think about going for those runs afterwards, but it's not going to be the same as actually doing your rehab work to get to the running
Mm.
part. And the same thing happens with your mental and emotional health. AI can't co-regulate. It can't sense your tone or your presence or your nervous system, but it can support it. And I think that's really important to understand is that it is a tool, but it's not the same as a safe relational space. Another super scary part of AI is okay, the benefit to it is that more and more people are turning towards it as a support network for mental health concerns. So stigma is reduced.
Yeah.
Accessibility has increased. The scary part to that, though, is that AI, being a large language model, it echoes and validates your perspective.
Right.
And so there's a recent article that came out at the end of last year, and I can send that over to you and to everyone to access it and read it thoroughly. But basically, OpenAI, which is ChatGPT's developer, did an audit of mental health use with ChatGPT. And I'm going to read this because I want to make sure I get all the stats correctly. But what they found is that there was an estimate that around 0.07% of users in a given week show possible signs of mental health emergencies related to psychosis or mania. So the same example I used with my client about having this urge to regulate, they're using it as a tool to seek out advice for psychosis or mania. And 0.07% seems small, but wait until I tell you the number, the total number. An additional 0.15% of users had conversations with explicit indicators of potential suicide planning or intent. And so although these percentages are very small, when you think of the number of people who have access to ChatGPT,
Total daily users.
Yeah, they recorded as many as 800 million active users in a week, meaning that that 0.07 and that 0.15% is coming out to 1.2 million users are considering suicide.
Wow. Crazy.
560,000 of them are showing signs of psychosis or mania per week.
Wow.
So although there's benefit to having access and having a tool available, there is a very dark side to AI that just promotes mental health distress.
Yeah, it's I mean, not a direct example, but it's sort of like, when the internet came out and you could start to search up, like Wiki Health and type
Yeah.
in your symptoms, and all of a sudden you're sort of self-diagnosing for bronchitis, something like that. People are using a large language model to sort of try to self-diagnose their own state of their mental health, where a professional who has nuance and understanding and experience should really be stepping in at that point and actually doing a proper diagnosis of that.
Yeah.
And that's maybe, I mean, it's still so new, and it's maybe something that down the road it will recognize that 0.7% and kind of prompt it with a notification like, hey, it seems like you should contact this person in your area. They're 10 blocks away. You could walk over there. We reached out on your behalf to make a connection, whatever, something along those lines, where it helps people get to the specific, support that they need.
Yeah.
And I've heard a few stories too now where because it is a large language model, it really only answers the questions that you give it. It's not necessarily predicting how you want to go about coming up with the solution. So if you ask it something like, someone who is in that 0.15% of wanting to commit suicide, and you start asking questions about how do I go about doing that, it will provide the answers because it doesn't have these professional, like barriers of, that a professional human would have to say, like, whatever the language is. Hey, I hear you. I understand. Da, 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 and they go down that proper process to guide someone to safety. The large language model is just going to go like, here's your question. Here's your answer. What's your next question? Okay, let's keep going. And it will lead to, and it has now led to, people committing suicide because they were sort of taught how to do that by a large language model, whichever one it was. So yeah, that is definitely the sort of scary side of it. And, with knowledge comes responsibility, or access comes responsibility. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out with the responsibility from the companies who are programming these things to, what are the regulations that go into place to keep people safe.
Yeah, and I just wanted to also add, like, for the listeners who know of somebody or they themselves are experiencing thoughts of suicide or self-harm, there are accessible ways to seek help. It doesn't have to come from ChatGPT or an AI model. If you even dial 988, I think that's Ontario. It might be across Canada, but it's a free hotline that you can just speak to a third party about how you're feeling. There's lots of different accessible ways to seek help. So you're not alone in it, and that there are different ways to help support through some of these really dark places that people are in right now.
Sometimes the best use of those models is to search for the best person in your area, or the most, person who's most aligned with the thing that you need. Anytime this subject comes up on the podcast, I always share in the show notes links for how you can access mental health support, and those hotlines are in there. So if you are in that kind of state right now, it'll be in the show notes. So easy to find. How do people misuse tools to avoid discomfort?
I think how do people misuse tools to avoid discomfort? I think, like anything, it's if you're seeking a shortcut, or you're expecting a certain outcome, and you're using these tools as a way to avoid that discomfort, then it defeats the purpose. Right? Like, for example, if you're training and your warm up at first is 10 minutes, and then the next day it becomes 15 minutes, 30 minutes, and then that's all my workout.
Right.
You're defeating the purpose of what the warm-up is, which is to prepare you for the workout. But if it's now taking over your entire workout time, and you're doing that consistently, then you're not getting the benefit of both.
I think another example of that too is, and I will put an asterisk before and after this, but just as an example, someone who has a weight loss journey that they really should be going on and partaking in, and they take something like a GLP-1 that gets them to their end result really fast. The bounce back of that weight gain is really high percentages, because by avoiding the journey of losing the weight, you haven't learned the skills along the way in discomfort on how to change eating habits, how to change lifestyle habits, how to change your environment and the toxins in the environment. And if you don't lose that, or you don't change that through learning and through discomfort, it's really high. Off the top of my head, I think it's like 70+% of people just kind of end up back in the same starting place that they began. Same with, like, The Biggest Loser back in the day was the same idea. like spoon fed to them how to do it. So the lessons weren't learned. So they ended up back in the same place. But I think that applies to everything. And same thing with the technology we brought up of like, if the tool is doing the job for you, you're not learning how to do the thing.
Yeah, so you know what that reminds me of in the mental health side of things is quite often I have clients who come in who give me a list. They know exactly what's wrong. Their
Mm-hmm.
self-awareness is through the roof. They
Mm-hmm.
they have dissected every single aspect of their life and why it's happened. You know, parents raised me like this, trauma this, like they know exactly. And knowing an insight is not enough.
Mm.
It's something that we call experiential therapy, where insight and talk therapy alone may not be enough for someone to move through that discomfort.
Mm-hmm.
And like a very easy example in training is like you can talk about the methods of training all you want,
Yeah.
but you actually have to put in the work. But it's easier to understand from a training perspective because there is a physical side to it.
Mm-hmm.
From a mental health perspective and emotional perspective, it's harder to conceptualize. But basically, what we want to do is expand the ability to sit in those same emotions that cause discomfort until they don't
Mm-hmm.
until they don't cause that same discomfort into the future.
Right. So I watched a video recently of this, which is maybe a good sort of visual example of this is this guy who is, he had a mental challenge or mental health challenge where he really couldn't talk to people. He kind of like froze up. He would get that freeze response, and he couldn't do it. But he was out in the wild, just trying to say hello to people, and so I'm sure leading up to that, they talked about, the practice of it and what it's going to take to do it and how you can do it. And here's some strategies. But eventually he had to go out into the wild and try it. And it
Yeah.
was just really cool to watch because he was having a really hard time, but he was just giving it his best effort.
Yeah.
And, in that example, just a, nice, like the people who he tried to talk to were so respectful and trying to be helpful and having a conversation with them. And it was really cool to see. But, that's a good example of like, you can talk about it all day long, but eventually, even though it's uncomfortable, you got to get out there and start to take some action on it.
Yeah, we call that in therapy, like that's a part of exposure therapy, but even leading up to it, there's something called somatic experiencing. So
Mm,
if there is a situation, let's say talking to strangers or public speaking, or from like an athlete's perspective, maybe it's like taking that penalty kick. It's like all
mm,
eyes are on you, and there's this like panic. We use protocols or different strategies to pendulate, so swinging into and out of that experience in a safe way, or
mm,
titrate, or we talk about it, we experience it, we embody that sense of panic, and then we step away. And you build your tolerance, you build your capacity to be in that discomfort until you're out there on the pitch and you're about to take that final PK.
mm.
Everyone's looking at you, and that's where you can really reprogram and rewire your brain to experience something new from the same
Mm.
emotions.
Yeah, that's super cool. That is sport in itself, right? It's
Yeah.
like you practice in order to perform in a game. You create these like synthetic pressures in a practice of like, it's in overtime and we got to score, next person to score wins the game. You do the countdown as you're hitting your free throws.
Yeah.
What came to mind there when you were saying that is this video of the Portuguese national team for soccer, and there was a penalty kick scenario, and Ronaldo is the guy. He's going to be the
Yeah.
guy to go kick the ball, and instead he says like, I forget the other guy's name. He's like, "No, you go do it." And the guy's like, no, I can't do it. I can't do it. And he's like, "You're good at this. Like, we see you do it every day in practice. you go kick the ball. And he like basically shoved him, into the pressure, but knowing that this guy could handle the situation and just gave him the opportunity to go and do it. And he scored and won the game, and it was, all good. But you need coaches like yourself who can kind of hone in on the skills, improve the skills with them, and then give them the opportunity to go out there and actually practice the skills that they spend so much time working on, so then it can be actualized. Like now you go do the thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Builds efficacy, self-efficacy with that.
Well, for people listening who want to learn more or work with you, how can they connect with you?
Yeah. So they can connect with me on social medias. I'm on Instagram, Facebook. I don't know if I just dated myself.
LinkedIn.
LinkedIn, definitely. I have my website up and running. I'm actually hosting a free nervous system regulation seminar, webinar on March 4th at 7 p.m. You can get tickets off of Eventbrite. But it is free just to learn more about specific tools. It's going to be a 3-part series. And the first one's all about the reason why our bodies react before our mind does, and how to recognize that. And after each webinar, I'll give some homework pieces to work on, and then we follow up in the other 2 parts.
Perfect. We will include all the links in the show notes. If this episode comes out after that date, we'll do a little prompt before the episode comes out. And then if you do that series again, that's something that people can follow up with.
Absolutely.
Perfect. Thank you, Annie, for joining me on the episode today. Everybody check the show notes for how to connect with Annie, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Thank you so much, Joe. This has been so much fun.
Thanks so much for listening to today's episode. If this conversation resonated, share it with someone who trains hard but lives under pressure. And if you want to connect with Annie or learn more about her work, all of her links are in the show notes. You'll also find our episode sponsors listed there: BiOptimizers, ATP Labs, Trainerize, Whoop, and Cala Red Light, along with the discount codes and links. So make sure you check those out. And if you're enjoying the podcast, I'd really appreciate a quick 5-star review. It helps more than you think. On Spotify, just open the show page for the 3-Phase podcast and tap the star rating on the top. It takes about 5 seconds. On Apple Podcasts, go to the show page, scroll down to ratings and reviews, tap write a review, and leave your rating there. Thanks for being here, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Thank you, everyone, for hanging in for the full episode. I appreciate you all. Quick reminder about the brands that make this podcast possible and the offers that you can take advantage of. These are products I use daily, and they help me perform at my best, recover faster, and stay on top of my game. Coaches, you know how hard it is to juggle clients' programs, progress tracking, and communicate. I've been there too. After years of grinding it out, I finally found Trainerize. It brings everything I need for coaching into one platform. Whether I'm onboarding new clients, scaling my business, or keeping people accountable, it just works. I've tried other platforms over the years, but for the last 3 years, Trainerize has been my go-to. It's easy for me to grow and for my clients to stay consistent. If you're a coach looking for flexibility and simplicity, check it out. Use the link in the show notes to get your first month with Trainerize for free. Here's the thing. Good sleep and recovery aren't optional, especially if you're trying to train hard, stay sharp, and keep up with life. That's why I use BiOptimizers. Magnesium Breakthrough and Sleep Breakthrough have been game changers for me. I've tried other products, but these ones deliver. High quality ingredients and noticeable results. If you want better sleep, digestion, or recovery, BiOptimizers fills the gaps your diet can't. Trust me, you'll feel the difference. Use the link in the show notes and the code 3phase10 to get 10% off your order. I used to stress about getting perfect sleep, and ironically, it ruined my sleep. That's when I started using Whoop. Whoop gave me clear insights on my recovery, strain, and sleep patterns, so I stopped guessing and started optimizing. It created a positive feedback loop for better sleep, better decisions, and better training. If you want to train smarter and recover better, Whoop is the tool you need. Use the link in the show notes and get the device and your first month with Whoop for free. Nutrition is the foundation of performance. That's why I trust ATP Labs. From Supreme Beef to MyoPrime Creatine and Pure Essential Amino Acids, these products fill the gaps in my nutrition and help me recover faster, train harder, and perform at my best. ATP Labs uses high-quality ingredients you can feel good about, and you'll feel the difference. If you're serious about fueling your performance, check them out. Use the link in the show notes and the code 3phase10 to get 10% off of your orders. Thanks for sticking it out through the ads, and we'll see you on the next episode.